to the next installment of Eder Casella Technology's Tech Talks. Today, partner Eric Vicencio will be discussing your IT roadmap. What is it? What should be on it? And how can you plan ahead? This webinar will be 30 minutes, and we ask that you just put any questions in the chat so we can answer them at the end of the webinar. Go ahead and take it away, Eric.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Vicencio. I'm the CIO and partner here at Eder Casella Technology. I've got over 15 years experience in IT, where I specialize in security and a bunch of other compliances, HIPAA compliancy, PCI, just into IT infrastructure just in general. Let's dive in. Enough about me. All right, so we often receive these questions from our customers, specifically new customers when they're coming onto us. They want to know where is the technology in their industry headed. I think that's probably one of the most eye-opening questions that we receive. How can they get their technology to work better? Will I be ready for big changes or innovations that are happening in my industry? What steps can I start taking now to get ready for the future? Are my investments that I've already made, 1, 3, 5 years ago, are they enough? Sometimes we get questions of, I bought this thing 20 years ago, is it still okay? Well, these are the questions that companies are starting to ask themselves because cybersecurity tends to make individuals have to ask this question. Is my cybersecurity stance good enough for the future? Is it good enough for now? Can I survive a long or large outage? I think something that happened recently in the news, you probably heard about all the Amazon Web Services outages, and this has prompted so many companies to start looking at, can I survive without Amazon, without AWS? These companies really don't understand what they have. So they don't have a roadmap to where they're going to go in 5 years, right? So some of the technology trends that we're seeing, purchasing new versus upkeeping of their current. The assumption, and I don't know where this assumption actually has come from. I've seen it in almost every organization that I've ever worked in, that the technology doesn't need upkeep, regular upkeep, whether that be just regular cleaning, maintenance, whatever it may be. Or after a large investment, they have no plans for upkeep or making sure that investment stays current. Assuming that you will know if or when a threat has hit your organization, and solely relying on the technology or software to keep threats out. There's also a huge misconception that we run into that IT changes are sometimes immediate. A lot of these IT changes, they take a lot of time. So what are we really talking about? When I'm talking about roadmaps, what is the real back end of this? Surprise, IT roadmaps are strategic plans. If you're a small or a mid-sized business owner and you don't have a strategic plan for at least your business, I think you need to take a step back and actually look at your strategic plan, look at the metrics that are important to you, making sure that everything that all your goals that you're trying to reach every year are being met. So that way you have, your end goal, you have what your target is. But how is that any different from technology? Technology would work the exact same way. How are the trends that we're seeing in the current environment? How are you weighing against all of those current trends? What hardware or software are you currently relying on? The roadmap or the strategic plan, you need to understand what you're relying on, so that way you can make the best decision choices for your company, your organization for the future. Where can technology help your business? This is the question that these small to mid-sized business owners, they're never asking themselves, how can I make this technology work better for me and for my business? How can hardware or software help me cut costs? Believe it or not, there's tons of software out there that would help you potentially cut hundreds, if not thousands of dollars off of your annual budget. And then what is out there that I don't know about? I like to tell people I am not a doctor. However, I can tell you in the medical field where a lot of the trends are going, where things are starting to go, whether that be, cloud-based or even web-based in that matter. We have to differentiate the two in a lot of ways, just because they are slightly different, whether it's cloud-based or web-based. So, story time. For example, I had a new customer come to Eder Casella Technology. They've been working with an MSP, managed service provider, does exactly what I do for years. He came to me, he was letting me know that I've got an inventory problem. And my first question to him is, I know your business. I know what you do day in and day out. It's something that we do that's maybe a little bit different. I want to know what's important to your business before I even start doing anything IT-wise. So I said, I will come in free of charge and I will look at what you're trying to solve here. I dissected the problem. It took me one day. He didn't have an inventory problem. He had a process problem. He wanted to spend all kinds of money. And trust me when I tell you that these inventory applications are not cheap. Not only do they come with a cost up front, just the licensing, but the actual manpower to put them in and then upkeep them, because it's going to be his staff. So in the long run, I ended up helping fix the actual problem with his processes and not implement a piece of software. And a lot of people look at me and they're like, why would you do that? Why, you're an IT provider, you should be helping them purchase. And that's not always the case. Processes tend to be a huge factor when it comes into it, but it really comes down to his strategic plan. Now we know where he's at, we know where he's going in the future, and so we can be sure and certain that any decisions that he's making now, we know what it's going to have, the trickle-down effect, whether that be 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it may be. So you may be asking yourself, okay, I've got IT, I've got an IT provider, or I have, on staff. Where do I get started? This just seems like something that I don't even know where to start. My favorite project management quote or line is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, okay? The easiest way to get started is to start breaking these things down. You need to start by one, looking at what's important to you. And I usually tell people, look a year out. Look at your first year. What are your goals for that year? If your goal is just to have minimal downtime, not really make any new purchases. So in that first year, what we're going to start to do is we're going to look at the age of your software and your hardware, okay? Your strategic plan really kind of has the basis of those two, because you need to know what you're currently using and how do you make it better, or how do you future-proof it, okay? I'm not saying that you have to jump in and you need to buy 30 servers in the first year. Who would do that? You need to really understand where you're at and what you need to get to, because your goal is not necessarily that first year, it's year 2, it's year 5. And once you've looked at what you have, I think you're going to see some glaring potential issues with what you have and how much you're relying on certain pieces. At that point, we need to start making a plan to ensure that you have that business continuity if something were to happen to any of those pieces. This also would start to lead into your disaster recovery plan. These roadmaps really are your basis for where you're at and where you're going. So there's different types as well. A lot of people will ask us, just in general, how do we, what different types of roadmaps are there? There's software roadmaps. If you're using one specific piece of software and you absolutely love it, but it's 20 years old, we need to start having a roadmap for how you take that 20-year-old piece of software and how you get off of it, how you still have your business continuity while retaining any software needs that you have. What new software is out there? it just blows me away how many new pieces of software come out each day. Pieces that you don't know about until you start looking. We also want to evaluate all of the software features that are out there. Maybe you're already paying for something that could replace another piece of software that you're also paying for. This is one of those things that once you start road mapping it, you'll start to see you've got overlaps. And maybe when you first evaluated a piece of software, it wasn't very good, and it's something that you're already paying for. Maybe you switch to it because it's going to save you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Your hardware. Doing a hardware roadmap, I think, is mission critical for a lot of the mid to small businesses everywhere. They tend to buy it and forget it. They never do anything with their hardware. They'll buy a server, they'll spend $30,000 in crazy fees on their hardware, but they really don't know what they have, and they expect it just to run forever. These things don't. The end of the tunnel really will show you that these pieces of hardware only have like a 5-year life to them, 10 if you're lucky. It all just depends on when you bought them and the hardware that was available at the time. I'll tell you that things that are bought now are far more reliable in that longevity than the ones that were even bought 3 years ago. The hardware is just different. We also need to evaluate your hardware use. There's so many providers, IT providers, that back in the day, they were using servers. They would sell you a server for about anything. And that's not always the case nowadays. NAS devices, so network attached storage, is replacing lots of servers in our field, or it's reducing the amount of hardware that you need on a server. But then also doing a security roadmap. What does your security stance look like? What is your security plan? We need to also evaluate the security devices and the software that you're using. The unfortunate matter is nowadays security is changing every day. If you even blink for a second, it's changed. And how do you, as a business owner or a leader in your business, ensure that everything is being checked and you know where you're going in the future? We don't know what the future is going to entail, what it's going to bring up, but at least if you start the process of having a roadmap, having a strategic plan for each of these pieces, I think it's really going to help you in the long run, just to ensure that checkbox is there. We've seen some crazy changes in the last year, just in terms of even insurance providers requiring things that they've never required before. Multi-factor authentication for VPN, so like remote connectivity, they're requiring these things to even give you insurance now. So if we don't have a roadmap and you haven't talked to an IT provider about doing something like this, you might want to start. You would start soon. Start sooner than later, because otherwise you're going to end up in a spot where you're trying to think on your toes and trying to come up with something just quickly, and that's not always the best case. The sooner you can start a strategic plan and start the process of getting in front of these changes that you need to be making in your organization, and ensure that you have a future planned out for you and your company, the better off you're going to be. And if you're an individual, a consumer, if you're joining this just to listen to what we have to talk about, this was very based on organizations, but consumers are almost the exact same. What's your plan for replacing your computers? Your Windows XP computer, if it's still on and you're using it for something, it's time to start thinking about where you're going in the future, and making sure that the choices that you're making now are not costing you more money now than they should be. I'd hate to have anybody on this webinar, and I know this is going to be a quick one because we're just talking about high-level strategic plan. But anybody on this webinar thinking about, buying a new piece of hardware or software without having a strategic plan, you may be buying it now, and in 6 months, it may be obsolete. So by all means, if you have on-staff IT or you don't have on-staff IT, your IT provider should be providing you with this information. Now, if you ask your provider, what you should be buying, and they tell you it's really up to you, it's time to sit down and really discuss these with a strategic IT leader, whether that being outsourced or internal. So at this time, I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
Thanks, Eric. There was one question. What key piece would you recommend be on your roadmap if your business is now in a hybrid model where you have remote employees?
So we're seeing multi-factor authentication being kind of one of those forefronts and things that you need to address. The hybrid models are interesting currently because it really depends on what kind of data you may have and where it resides. If you have a hybrid model and you have a VPN and you don't have multi-factor authentication turned on, it's very difficult to really secure everything down and make it safe for everybody to be working remote. Now, there are other key pieces like making sure that you understand on the liability and or the technology that's in place for those laptops or the remote workers devices. Even as a business owner, if you have a remote worker and something happens on that laptop, who's really liable for it, whether that being a employee-owned laptop or remote device, or if it's your company's remote device. So
Great.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. Doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in right now, but feel free to send them or send us a message if you think of something after. But thank you again to everybody for joining us. We hope to see you at our next Tech Talk, which will be the second Wednesday in February 9th. And we'll be discussing all things Wi-Fi, how to keep you safe, what you need from a hardware perspective to get the most out of your Wi-Fi. So, all right, we'll let you get a few more minutes back in your day and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.